to talk about design systems.
This meeting is being recorded.
What are they and how to use them? We'd like to share the value of a design system, how it can help your team solve multiple problems, and also how it can help create a better omnichannel experience for your users.
Hi everyone, I'm Megan, and I know Liz already gave us a very beautiful introduction there. But yeah, I'm currently a part-time master student, and I'm a UX UI designer at DVT. And I've been in this field for the past 4.5 years. And yeah, I'm currently based at the Client Tracker on the mobile team.
I'm Monique. I've been in the design industry for almost 10 years. I've previously worked in branding, as mentioned, mostly with startup companies. And now I'm a UX UI designer with DVT, also the Client Tracker, which is a South African-based vehicle tracking and recovery company. Today, we'd like to discuss what a design system is, share our process in creating one from scratch, and also share some of the interesting findings we experienced along the way. Some of the topics we'd like to touch on is how we realized we needed a design system and what started us on this process, how design systems can create collaboration between multiple design teams while still remaining cohesive, especially remotely, our move from Sketch to Figma, as many designers are doing recently, creating and maintaining a cohesive vision for your product team, and lastly, how a design system can ensure a better omnichannel experience for your users.
Just to tell you a bit about some of the pain points that we experienced. So the app had gone through a redesign in the past 2 years, and I joined the team pretty much at the end of all of this. And although the team did a great job in rehauling the UX and the UI of the app, they had to work quick and under pressure to meet their deadlines. And due to this, the designs for both iOS and Android were completely scattered. There was no solid design system put in place. And where there was some form of documentation of the fonts and colors and components, it was inconsistent between the two platforms. Furthermore, the elements such as our colors, font styles, and components were inconsistent across the design documents on Sketch, on the handover tool, which was Zeppelin at the time, and in the code. So there was no single source of truth for us to reference. Because the designs were on Sketch and I had to manually upload them to Zeppelin, it created a keyman dependency. So if I was perhaps man down for 2 days, the team couldn't move forward with the latest designs. And it also came to light that although the app just went through a whole redesign, that it did not reference the web platform, resulting in no omnichannel experience.
We've also encountered a few more pain points before realizing we needed a more structured system in our design teams. The first one being that we realized that there was no consistency between product teams. We would have alignment meetings and components and even features would be completely different, have different titles, colors, fonts, and UI details. When discussing new features with stakeholders, there was no clear vision on how the feature would look, and designers did not know from what framework to start. So often the designer working on the new feature would create components from scratch, resulting in a completely new look and feel in the final design. An inconsistent user interface can easily result in a lack of an omnichannel experience, and it can cause a user to not understand the visual language on one platform versus the other, especially when working on a vehicle tracking app. For example, in an emergency, when a user cannot use their phone or the app, they might need the web app, but the two applications did not function the same, look the same, or even use the same terminology. So navigation for a user that's not familiar with either product is very difficult. Another problem we encountered is needing to apply universal changes like branding updates. We had no way to make a global update to all of our components and style guides in one easy effort because none of the components were linked to one style and all teams used a different library. Design documentations did not coincide with what the prototypes on InVision showed, as there was no rules, no guidelines on how the components should be used, which also resulted in a lack of omnichannel experience for users who would use the app and then want to switch over to the web app. So as you can see, we really had a need for a universal platform to collaborate, bring multiple teams together, and create a cohesive product. That's how we came to the solution to create a design system. We'd like to take you through what a design system is, the importance of having one, and how it can help promote collaboration, and also how to get started. So what is a design system? It's a collection of visual elements and various sets of reusable components, principles, and guidelines that are used by a team of designers and developers to create a cohesive and valuable product for the user, and also to create a consistent design language within a product team. So what to include? There's no standard list of components to include in a design system, but there are some commonly used elements that the most effective systems tend to feature. The first being a style guide. A style guide consists of all the graphic elements like the various logos, loaders, color guides, typography, and so on, all the visual elements of the brand itself. But it can also contain accessibility elements, such as tone of voice as a guideline for any messages or dialogues. Many of the items in your style guide might come from your company's marketing team or a brand guideline, especially with larger companies. But if you're at a startup or a smaller company that does not have a marketing team, this is a great opportunity for you as the designer to define the style guide as a standard for yourself and future designers to use. Having a style guide is also a great tool for onboarding new team members of any field, designers, developers, even something to share with new stakeholders. And it, of course, ensures an overarching consistency in visual elements through multiple platforms. The next section to be found in a design system is a pattern library, which is used for the guidelines of repeated and often used components like headers, cards, and lists, which at our client currently we have multiple types of for different sections like the map and vehicle lists. So it's good for future reference to define the specific anatomy of each of these patterns. Also a great addition to the handover process, where developers can have a look at how a component interacts with the rest of the platform. Also be sure to include accessibility elements like guidelines, key rules, and recommendations that can help create designs that are more accessible to all types of users. Lastly, we have the component library. A component library features all of your reusable UI components, such as interchangeable backgrounds, navigation, menu items, buttons, filters, and so on. This might be the most important part of your design system, as this is where the style guide and the pattern library come together to create all of the components that you will use to create the design of a product. A component library can save a designer a lot of time, as the reusable components can be set up as variants to create multiple options for each component. For example, one button can have the given variables of active, hover, pressed, or inactive, which can save a lot of time when set up correctly as a component variant with multiple properties. Megan will be taking you through our shared design system at the end of the talk. Here we'll show you all of these sections as we currently use them. So what is the benefits of a design system, and why should companies invest in spending time to create one? There are four main benefits that make building a design system worthwhile for your business. Firstly, consistency. Creating a clear set of rules and guidelines to follow for any team member. A consistent design system will also result in a consistent final product and a better experience for your users. A consistent brand also builds trust with users and gives the sense of a reliable, trustworthy product. Cross-functional collaboration. It enables multiple teams to share one vision and work from one source of truth, creating less confusion and more cohesive products. It increases the speed and scalability of design, and a design system mitigates duplicate work, like repeatedly creating the same elements and patterns, so designers can work more efficiently. A good strategy on how to start your design system would be to follow these basic steps. Start with your style guide, so all branding, colors, fonts, and icons are defined and set up as a style component. Then audit the existing product. From there, you can build a catalog of UI components and visual elements that will form the foundation of your design system. Through that, you can identify any inconsistencies that might have emerged and make the appropriate decisions for the future. Then create your components and set up your variants so that each component can be switched to a different state quickly and efficiently. Lastly, create your pattern library. As mentioned, your pattern library is where you would set up how to use these various components and define the rules and guidelines around using them. There's no perfect time to start a design system. It can be a daunting task at the start if you don't know where to begin, but the best time is to start as soon as possible, before components get out of hand and you find yourself creating duplicate work. Design systems can take a lot of effort to maintain, but the reason why the biggest companies in the world rely on them to create amazing products is because they do work very well if done right, and can save any designer and developer a lot of time and effort once they're set up correctly, bridging the gap from design to development. As more companies are relying on design systems as the basis of building their product, it is important as UX UI designers that we create design systems with accessibility in mind. Inclusive design should be considered at all ends of the process. Consider language and learning barriers when looking at the brand's tone of voice in your style guide. Look at tasting colors used on components to make sure the text is easy to read for people with visual impairments. Consider font sizes in your style guide and on components like buttons and cards. Use plugins and automated accessibility checkers while you're putting the design system together. And consider team accessibility as well. Make sure the headings and component usage is clear enough for any person to understand and to navigate through. Also use your pattern library to document all of these accessibility specifications so that the rules of how to use each component come together. As designers, we need to adapt to any change. The same will become clear with how we design. Design systems will also soon evolve as the software we create them on evolve as well. The future of design systems might not be clear now, but we have to keep certain ideas in mind to ensure that the design system you have created stays relevant, scalability, and easy to adapt to new technologies. White labeling is also a big topic amongst companies these days, being able to create a product that can be easily changed to suit a completely different brand. Also think about how quickly the technology we work on as designers change. The speed at which devices are evolving, virtual reality and artificial intelligence is no longer just a topic of sci-fi movies. So we started with a lot of research before creating a design system. We had to look at different software like Adobe XD, Figma, and the software we were working on at the time, which is Sketch. We tried to collaborate between the mobile teams and web teams and share files over Sketch, but often found that the work was not saved correctly, or if one person moved a library, it would delink all of the components from a Sketch file. Especially when working remotely, as many of us do these days, we did not have a seamless way to work as individual designers working on separate teams. And lastly, there was no structured communication or references between developer and designer. We previously used Envision, which has limited sharing functionality in specifying new designs to developers, but we knew that the handover process could be so much more detailed and interactive. Just to show you a quick before of our previous symbols file, it was quite easy to have components snowball with the lack of structure that Sketch provides, especially when you're busy and start creating variants with no start or end point. So lastly, we needed to create a system to ensure collaboration between teams, to make sure that the users find our products easy to use and more familiar when switching between mobile and desktop. And most importantly, working together across teams remotely while still creating a cohesive and meaningful product. I'll now be handing over to Megan to discuss how we arrived at our final solutions.
Sorry about that. So luckily there was a platform that could solve all of these problems for us, and that platform is Figma. We wanted to migrate to Figma. The design system needed some serious attention, as well as the web and mobile designs. At this stage, it was better to start from scratch and migrate to Figma because, one, well, it's the new kid on the block, and it offers so many new features that allows us to streamline the design process and make things such as handovers and prototyping easier. And two, it enables better collaboration between teams, especially because we are working remotely. And it will aid us in helping creating the omnichannel experience that we were aiming to create. Switching to a different design software is easier said than done. Migrating to a new design software is a massive investment in time, money, and resources. And especially starting a new design system from scratch is also time consuming. So we needed buy-in from our stakeholders first, which we got. Now, Figma made this process super seamless with the range of features and plugins that it has. A few examples of how Figma facilitated in not just streamlining the way design systems are created, but also the design system going forward are variants. Variants are component combinations that we can group as a single component set. As opposed to Sketch, it's easier to navigate. It's sometimes small, but it helps us to streamline the design process and looks a bit more organized. Variants also made it super easy for us to create components in different states, such as our text fields, our buttons, and card designs. Variants also helped us to create different components for both light and dark mode. And with the flick of a simple switch, we could have a full dark mode UI in a matter of a minute. As you can see in the example, we can switch between different states of the same design, as well as dark mode versions of that design. Figma enables remote collaboration, so Monique and myself could now collaborate on features and components and quickly copy and paste these components into our design systems. Figma is cloud-based, therefore it enables us to consider and improve our omni-channel experience. Because we mostly work remote, we can now have oversight of each other's work, or our design systems, by simply sharing files with each other. A shared workspace means we can see our most updated designs at that time, and no more sharing sketch files that may become outdated in just the space of one day. Now, in the case of Monique or myself are man down for 2 days, the developers and other teammates have access to all of our designs, therefore minimizing key man dependency within our teams and across teams. Now, this is all good and well, but after the design systems were created for both mobile and web, we started identifying some problems within our respective design systems. Components were overcomplicated, outdated, mismatched, and in some cases, components such as our text fields did not follow design standards. And because we now had oversight of each of our design systems and design systems, we realized our artifacts, our components, and our overall experience did not match, resulting in little to no omni-channel experience, and this being one of the biggest problems that we faced. So what is omni-channel experience? It's a way of ensuring that our users continue to enjoy the same experience with the same ease across your app or website's multiple channels. So as an example, let's think about Takealot or Facebook. If you use the app on your phone and quickly jump onto the website, it doesn't take you long to figure out how to use the same platform on a different device. Now, this was not exactly the case for our app and for our website. There was no cohesiveness across the UX and the UI of the two platforms. Design components didn't look the same, nor did they work the same. Our features had different naming conventions, and things such as our navigation across the two platforms were completely different. The two platforms didn't tie in with one another. One platform caters for consumers, while the other caters for a mixture of consumers and small businesses. But at the end of the day, it is still the same product. So how are we solving for this? Through a Figma-based design system. So the first step, which was very essential, was to collaborate with the developers. Each designer had to understand how the developer had to set up their themes, so we can find a way to accommodate each other. So we first had to audit what was already there before completely starting from scratch. The developers also have to use this design system, so it is very essential that we are all in the same space and comfortable with the new change. After that, the first step of starting the new design system was to begin with our style guide. The style guide is essentially the foundation of our design systems, and this had to be done right from the start. It is essential that we think about scalability, and through generic naming conventions, this will enable us to help grow our systems in the future. By using generic naming conventions for our colors and t-shirt sizing for fonts, it should do the trick. White labeling also came into play, so we had to consider how we work with the developers when setting up the design systems so that it caters for future white labeling. Tracker's brand also went through a massive redesign in the past few months. So the style guide also aided us in quickly updating the branding. We could update the colors, the logos, and the fonts, and this would reflect universally throughout all of our designs. After that, we defined our icon library. Across web and mobile, we were using a mixture of material icons, SF symbols, and custom tracker icons. But for now, on the mobile side, we are sticking to SF symbols for iOS and material icons for Android until marketing can deliver the new custom icons to us. We then continued with our components, our atoms, our molecules, and organisms. This is where we started to compare and identify that our components, such as our buttons, cards, and text fields, did not match. And later on, we could even start with templates just to make our lives a little bit easier. Accessibility was also kept in mind during all of this. We used plugins as well as online tools to ensure our designs are AAA approved for all of our users. Because we could now collaborate and had our design system in Figma, this was a great place for us to identify areas of improvement. We were now able to create consistency between our components, what they look like, and determine how our users would interact with them. We started to work towards a system where we can achieve omni-channel experience. And this is how we did it. So the app had just gone through a redesign, so we had to start small. Our first step was to look at our UI components, such as our buttons, our cards, and overall colors. So at least when a user uses the app or web platform, they would have the same look and feel. We then started looking at our copy and naming conventions. If things like the navigation used the same copy, as well as specific terminologies used in the app and in the web, then we could already be one step closer to our omnichannel experience. Next, we re-looked every feature in detail and started auditing the platforms. Again, because the app had just gone through a redesign, we couldn't go back and change all of these features again. Instead, what we did is compare what we have on the app and on the web and determine how we can create the same journeys. And this is still an ongoing process for us. If new features come in, we collaborate on them to ensure that the features will cater for our users on both platforms. Creating an omnichannel experience will always be an ongoing process. Apps and websites grow, and features will always be introduced or changed, and therefore it is essential that we collaborate and have oversight of each other's work. And all of this is now possible within a remote working world because of Figma. We are changing the lives of our users while collaborating remotely. I'd like to quickly take you through a walkthrough of our shared design system. So a design system is a living, breathing thing, and it is something that will never be finished. A design system will grow with you and your company and your team. And as mentioned, we first started with our style guide. Now the style guide is based on the new rebrand. Initially, we worked very closely with marketing on this and to define the brand guidelines and how to create the graphics, things like our loaders, our text fields, our colors, and ensure that we are aware of the changes that need to be implemented going forward. So as you can see here, we've defined our logos, our color guides, our font styles. Here we've started considering our accessibility, tone and language, things such as our backgrounds, elevation, and imagery.
Next, we have a pattern library, which is used for the guidelines of repeated and often used components like headers, cards, and lists. It's still a work in progress, and we will be completing this after the majority of the components are created. But this will be very useful as a reference to define the specific anatomy of each of these patterns. Then we have our component library. This is the web-focused component library, starting with various interchangeable backgrounds for the control center, as well as for the map, and various map types. Because I designed for different sizes on the web app, it saves a lot of time to be able to responsively switch from desktop to mobile. Here we also have all of our icons, various navigation components, cards, which we do use a lot of to display every type of vehicle and selection state. We also make use of filter chips, all set up as variants, and I often create component sets, which can be seen as a cluster of components that are grouped to form a bigger component, especially for certain features, so that it's easier to make changes to the main component only. Then we also have buttons, dialogues, and switches, all set up to be one single component that can have endless variants, states, and properties.
Going to the mobile component library, so I'll only be taking you through the Android library for now. But again, we have our app bars. We've tried to design every state possible that we could, and also the dark mode version of all of those states. So here we have our avatars, things such as our backgrounds, our buttons, and cards. And going into the cards, we have all the different types of cards that we have, as well as every state that we may find them in, followed by the dark mode variant of those card designs. Our dialogues, our input fields, and again, focusing on the different states for each component that we could get. So for our text fields, things like the normal states, leading icons, leading and training icons, etc. And we also have it in every different state. So normal, selected, filled, error state, and again, all of those states with assistive text, and all of those within a dark mode variant. Our indicators, keyboards, list items. Things like our QR codes, we also started including into our component library, our tab bars, vehicle selectors, snack bars, selection controls, our different pickers, pins, navigation bars, and different maps. Handing over to Monique again.
Just to share our final thoughts, we are no experts in design systems, and we are also learning so much along the way. But the one thing we can say is that having a design system is definitely improving our way of working as UX UI designers. A design system is only the foundation. It's a tool to help you define the baseline of a product and then build from there. You still need to be intentional in every decision you make. You need to question previous design solutions, especially when converting files as we did from Sketch to Figma. A design system is never completely done. A product remains relevant by continuously evolving and adapting to fulfill user needs, and design systems are no different. In conclusion, a design system has so much value. It can help your team work more efficiently, save your company time and money, and most importantly, it can help you create a better omnichannel experience for your users by creating a cohesive product that any user will understand, trust, and easily know how to use. Our goal moving forward is to utilize the design system through all of our different product teams to create a cohesive, seamless, and integrated experience for our users. Thank you.
Any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, ladies. That was really interesting. And I think very valuable to understand both the value of a design system in general and then understanding the specifics of how you tackled and approached it. So we do have a few questions here in the chat. So we have a question from Free Thinking. Hi, I'm not sure if it's a practice makes perfect type of scenario, but how do you have the foresight to know what component to create at the start?
So just to answer that, I think that might come into play if you're designing a product from scratch, or if you are at a client that has an existing product. You might then switch around auditing the product first and going through all of your components that you have on the app or the website. And from there, you create those components and think about, are they the correct solution to go with, or should they be redesigned? But I think it depends if you're starting with a completely new product that you're designing from scratch, or an existing one.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to look at the components that you will reuse all of the time. So things like your buttons, your text fields, and your title bars. So if there are some components that it's kind of a once-off type of thing, then you won't usually put it into the design system.
Great. And then we have a question from Helman, who asks, do you currently make use of any grid point system? For example, 8-point grid system, 8, 16, 24, 32, etc.
Yes, we currently do. We might not have showed it in our style guide, but we do. And we're also very strict with that.
Yes, I think that is something that we will be adding to the pattern library going forward. Once all of our components are created, it will be defined specifically in how to use them, and how to use a grid system as well, as a guide for the developers as well.
Then from Robert, we have, he says it's an impressive style guide. How long did it take you to make, and how big was the team?
So I'm the only designer on mobile, and Monique is the only designer on the website. So for me personally, it took 2 months, full time, 8 hours a day, every sprint. Yeah.
Yeah, and on the website, it was about 4 to 5 months, because it was not a dedicated focus. I was working on it part-time between sprints. So that's why we mentioned it is a work in progress. I think a proper design system would take about 1 year or 2 years to complete and to be fully done, even though it's never really fully done, because products evolve so quickly. You need to keep up with that. So it does take a lot of time, especially with one designer. A lot of companies have a dedicated design system designer who only works on this 24/7. So it's time consuming for someone within a team of only one designer.
Okay, Robert then also asks, what type of input did your developers have in designing the system, or in the design system at least?
So on my side, naming conventions was quite a big thing. So we had to consider the different theming files of, for instance, material versus iOS, and how that is set up. So I couldn't kind of go and name the colors or the font styles to what I wanted. We had to work together and see what will work for both of us, meaning for me and the developer, plus design iOS and Android. So we had to find something very universal that would work across the team. And that initially came down to generic naming conventions for our colors and t-shirt sizing for our fonts. And I think everyone was happy with it. And going forward, it will help us all like implement new fonts, again, going back to scalability. So if a new font is introduced or a new font style is introduced, we don't have to go and figure out what the name is going to be for that font style. Yeah, and same for the colors as well.
And on our side, the handover process using Figma's design system is quite fresh. So we've started in the last few projects handing certain projects over in Figma through the design system. So because it is quite fresh on our side, it's going to be a very interesting learning process, and being open to developers' feedback and suggestions on what's easier to use, what's more understandable, including certain code elements as well. So it's going to be a very exciting time for our team.
Cool. Did you make use of a base design system like Material?
Yes. So we referenced material design at the start, just on the structure of how our design system would be built.
And I also referenced the iOS 15 design system, also found in the Figma community quite a lot. That's also how I figured out that we could actually make dark mode components for everything with a simple flick of a switch.
Okay. Do you make use of Zeppelin or any something similar? I think you did mention that you guys use Figma for the handover.
Yeah, so the old way of working was we would design in Sketch and then we'd upload to Zeppelin. And that is where the developers would go and view the designs and get their components. But we are now fully migrated onto Figma. So at least on the mobile side, we are starting to hand over on Figma. Specifically, there is an inspect mode for developers that offers pretty much the same functionality that Zeppelin does. So it was a win-win for everyone.
Yes, on our side as well, we moved from Sketch and InVision, which is similar to Zeppelin, but just on the web. So we're moving all of that to Figma as well.
I see more and more a trend of people moving into Figma if I look among our clients. So definitely quite a valuable tool with more and more plugins that can be used by designers. Helman asks if you have any recommended resources which would help. From my side, I'll just say I'd recommend looking up Atomic Design by Brad Frost. It's very valuable in terms of wrapping your head around how to build a design system. And it's really valuable. From your side, any recommendations for resources?
We do have a list of resources that we can send with where the talk will be posted, whether on YouTube or Eventbrite, that we can reference for everyone, definitely. We made use of quite a lot of references. So we'll be able to share the list wherever we can.
Yeah, I'd recommend following Monique and Megan on LinkedIn, and then they can also share the list on there. You can be sure to get the latest insights from them.
Yeah, 100%.
Then we have a question from Alex. She'd love to hear about the collaboration, how the collaboration worked between the two of you in building a cohesive system.
Oh, I never know who's going to go first.
You're welcome to go first.
Okay, so we had to sit together from the beginning and determine kind of how this thing is going to look like, how this thing is going to work. But of course, we are two different teams. So the style guide was essential for us to get that going. And then Monique went ahead and did her components and component library and so on, and I went ahead and did mine. Going forward, if new features do come in, a good example is we have a pin on our maps to show you where your vehicle is, and it looked completely different on the two platforms. So Monique and myself sat together and we collaborated in figuring out how this thing is going to work. How can we not change it too drastically, but how can we still have the same experience? And together we collaborated, made one or like several designs which we agreed on, and then just simply added that to our design systems.
Yes,
so
I think
it's ongoing.
It's important to remember that you're still two individual designers. So we would collaborate in alignment meetings and say what we need to work on, what we need to look at. Then we would break away and do it in both of our separate ways, our different styles and our ways of thinking. Then we would start to bring it together again. I think the most important part of collaborating is allowing each other to break away and work in your own way and with your own mindset, do your own research, but then always coming together again at some point and having alignment meetings and making sure you're on the same track. And then if you're even not, sometimes we were not on the same track, they would work together to figure out what the middle way would be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, because we work on two different platforms, on mobile and web, the interaction is a bit different. So, and of course, the product is also different, even though we don't want it to be. The one caters for consumers, the one caters for consumers and small businesses. And each of us have to consider that in our own respective platform. And then we'd come together and find that middle ground and see how we can kind of accommodate both of these platforms.
Okay, cool. Then another question from Helman. Do you begin with master components or create individual states and then create components and variants afterwards?
Personally, we start with the master components first, looking at all the main features, all the main components first, then creating variants from each of them. I think variants on our side especially, it's almost endless because we have lists for the map, lists for control center, lists for managers. I would start with the initial variants and then continue on as you find more and more of them.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Okay, Robert asked if the talk will be put on YouTube. Yes, we will make sure that it's available on the DVT channel, so you can have a look there. We post lots of different talks and events and things on there that you can check out. And from Marguerite, how do you deal with a new feature or functionality that introduces a component that doesn't fit in the design system? Do you try and use existing components, or would you design a new one and break the pattern?
So we sorry, Megan, go first.
I think it definitely depends on how often you're going to use this component. And I definitely think that should not limit you in creating new components or not creating new components. You should still be innovative. And again, it comes down to how often are you going to use this component, and is it worth it putting it into the design system?
100%. If it's a completely new feature, it's worth really looking how the best way would be to design it. If it is from scratch, but just using your existing components as a reference, that's also a good way to go.
Okay, from Jono, what are your top 3 design tools or apps that you can recommend to developers?
That's an interesting question. So we're trying to limit too many different apps and tools. We try to use everything within Figma by using very interesting and very helpful plugins, rather than how we previously worked with Sketch. Then you have InVision as well. Then you have different plugins or Chrome plugins even. So we try to combine everything in Figma as much as possible, but we'll definitely be sharing a few plugins as well on the slide deck.
Awesome. From Quibus, can you use this design system to more easily create a prototype for stakeholders to get quicker stakeholder feedback?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the prototyping functionality in Figma is amazing. Like, it makes it super interactive and the animations are amazing. So just that allows you to sell an idea a lot better. And sharing a prototype is as easy as getting a link of the prototype and sharing it to your stakeholders.
100% agree.
From Mary, what are the accessibility tools you used?
So there are plugins like Stark that was really helpful, but there are also really helpful online tools that I found that also helps you to identify whether your UI components are accessible and not only your text. So I think that's something we'll also include in maybe in the list that we share.
Definitely. And there's also a lot of color contrast checkers, font sizing checkers. It really helps to do that bulk work for you, because you select one file and the plugin checks all your font styles, all your color combinations, if the contrast is good enough. Yeah, so there's quite a few of them. We'll definitely share them.
Okay, Renata asks if there is a way to transfer existing Envision prototypes to Figma without using the sketch files.
So for Envision, I am not sure. To be honest, I have left our Envision in the past and I'm converting everything new on Figma. For the reason that I don't have unnecessary files in my new Figma working files. There is a bit of outdated file sourcing there. There is items that we redesigned in the meantime. So if it's something we're working on now, I rather create the new prototypes from my working files in Figma and keep your Envision files as a reference if you need them.
Yeah.
I definitely think that with everyone moving into different softwares, it's that compatibility will always be a bit of a sticking point. I see that Karen says that we will be sharing this recording on all of our social media channels and on our website. So you can check out DVT on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever else you might think to find us, and you'll be able to find this recording there afterwards. And then from Nico, hi Nico, haven't chatted to you in a while. How do you deal with developers not being able to develop the feature? How do you go back, or do you go back and change it, or how do you approach it?
Well, by the time the feature is already in our designs, we have had many refinement sessions on this feature. So we would eventually, we would introduce the feature or the concept in our refinement sessions, and we would talk about it, and the team would size it, and then from there on, we will start adding it into our designs. So by the time the developer sees the feature in the designs, it's not the first time they've seen it. They've seen it a few times and they've been part of discussions.
Yeah, that definitely highlights the importance of a refinement meeting. On our side, refinement meetings are quite new. So often developers see designs the first time when we groom it or when we are busy with it. So I'm personally very flexible with our developers. I really like to have a chat with them if they don't agree with something. If they work on something and see it doesn't work, we go back to the drawing board. And sometimes we come up with a better solution. But I think in general, as designers, we need to be very flexible with developers and their opinions.
Yes. And I think also bearing in mind, if a developer only sees it the first time when they find out they have to develop it and it's not completely possible, it takes away that streamlining process where we are trying to build things faster. So in sake of saving time for everyone, we would discuss it beforehand and kind of get all of the technical conversations out of the way and adapt the designs accordingly.
100%.
Okay, Jen asks, how did you transition your white label components to high fidelity while the rest of your team are still using the current design system? And then also, how did you handle version controlling?
Okay, so version controlling, we don't have, we haven't worked much on that aspect yet, or I haven't at least. In terms of white labeling, a POC is suggested, so the developers will first see if these new naming conventions and new colors or naming conventions of the colors and fonts are possible, and they'd adapt it to existing designs and see how it works out for them. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
Okay, and then from Helman, is there any documentation attached to your design system that you would recommend having, either to track changes or to update it, etc.?
Yeah, so that's very important question, an important thing to have. So on the mobile team, they do have a dedicated BA that documents all of their design documentation. On our side, we don't have a dedicated person. So after a trial and error on our side, I think, I realized the importance of having design documentation. And I think even if your team has a BA documenting everything, it's very important as a designer to document all of your design changes, any stakeholder changes, any inputs from developers, not only for a handover someday to a different designer, but to new team members, and also to go back if something is being debated and there's no clear idea on what the original reasoning was. So design documentation is very important. It's not attached personally to my design system, but it's a separate document.
Yeah, same for us.
Okay, that's all the questions in the chat. Any other questions that anyone has, please do post them in the chat so that we can quickly ask in our last 5 minutes. I'd like to know, what was your favorite part about working on this design system?
Variants. Just figuring out how to make my life easier and the next designer coming in, and how we can just streamline this process.
Yeah, I think on my side, personally, I've mostly worked as a sole designer at previous companies. And for the last year, I've also been the only designer in my team. So when Megan joined the team and we started to collaborate remotely on Sketch, it was a bit of a headache. But when we transitioned that to Figma, it really changed our working lives because it was so much more easy. We could leave messages for each other saying, check this, I'm going to change this, let's have a look at this item. So the remote collaboration in doing this whole design system throughout the process has been really awesome, and learning from each other, of course.
Adding on to that, Nico asks, what was the hardest part of creating the design system?
Creating the design system was the hardest part. It's very detailed, very time consuming, but it's 100% worth it.
Yeah. What was difficult for me is we switched to Figma the same time we started with the design system. So it took a lot of time, first of all, to figure out how to use these new features, like installing plugins and making variants. And then auto layout came into play, and that broke my brain.
So Alex asked, what was the biggest learning that you've taken out of this process?
I think to be flexible in your process, to not be set in your ways. Switching software and switching programs it's a daunting task on its own. So be open to change. The handover process changes, your way of designing changes. As designers, I think different software is easy to pick up for designers, but the process is quite different. So you have to be open to any change and any flexibility.
I'd also say collaboration with developers. That's also that was important for me. And also figuring out how they are going to use it, and do they understand how these things are structured and why it's structured in the way it is, and how can we work and make this thing comfortable for all of us to use at the end of the day. So yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we've all gained a bit more understanding into your process and understanding into the world that is design systems. So for any of you that use the Tracker app, there was quite a big release about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So you can see firsthand what the ladies are talking about if you go and have a look on the app or on their website for that matter. Thank you again, Megan and Monique. This was really insightful, and I look forward to seeing you guys doing much more talks at much bigger stages and arenas. thank you very much for everyone that joined. Thank you for the very insightful questions. And we will hopefully see you again soon at our next DVT Tech Talk.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.